Moose knuckle is third. The qualification session is at Brands Hatch Circuit in Foxham, Great Britain. Dave B Racing from New Zealand is P1. The race dictator from New Zealand in Surtees Bend is third. Dave B Racing in Sheen Curve is P1. Dave B Racing is up 9.53 in Graham Hill Bend. Dave B Racing is up 9.68 in Hawthorns Bend. Dave B Racing is up 5.21 in Stirlings Bend. Moose Knuckle from Canada in Clearways is P3 up 9.84. Moose Knuckle Improved is first with a 130.724. Moose Knuckle is up 0.45 in Druids Bend. Moose Knuckle is up 0.19 in Pilgrim's Drop. Moose Knuckle is up 0.57 in Dingle Dell. Moose Knuckle is up 1.53 in Clark. Moose Knuckle is provisional pole with a 129.510. Dave B Racing in Brabham is P3. Dave B Racing Improved is P3 with a 132.661. 3.151 off pole. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Chris Butt is P3. Chris Butt is up 0.43 in clearways. Chris Butt Improved is P3 with a 130.376. 0.866 off pole. Moose Knuckle is first up 0.13. Dave B Racing is P4 up 0.92. Best lap is a 132.661. 3.151 off pole. Dave B Racing is up 2.57 in clearways. Moose Knuckle in Brabham Straight is P1. Moose Knuckle is provisional pole with a 129.197. The Race Dictator in Brabham is second. The Race Dictator Improved is P2 with a 129.383. 0.186 off pole. Dave B Racing in Surtees is P3. Best lap is a 130.144. 0.947 off pole. The Race Dictator is second up 0.11. Moose Knuckle is P1. Best lap is a 129.197. The Race Dictator in Paddock Hill is second. Jason Short from New Zealand in Brabham is fifth. Moose Knuckle from Canada is first up 0.11. Moose Knuckle is up 0.16 in clearways. Chris Butt from New Zealand in Graham Hill Bend is P4 up 0.12. Moose Knuckle is provisional pole with a 129.152. Moose Knuckle in Druids is P1. Moose Knuckle is up 0.47 in Pilgrims. The qualifying session is now in overtime. Moose Knuckle is up 0.35 in Dingle Dell. Moose Knuckle is up 0.60 in Clark. Jason Short in Hawthorne Hill is third. Best lap is a 129.489. 0.337 off pole. Moose Knuckle is provisional pole with a 128.529. Jason Short is up 0.14 in Sheen Curve. The race session is at Brands Hatch Circuit in Foxham, Great Britain. Moose Knuckle from Canada is first. The Race Dictator from New Zealand is P2. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Dave B Racing is P1. Chris Butt from New Zealand in Halewoods is fourth. Dave B Racing from New Zealand is P4. Jason Short from New Zealand in Pilgrims is fourth. Chris Butt is P5. Dave B Racing in Stirlings is third. Jason Short in Clark is P4. Jason Short passed Dave B Racing for P3. Dave B Racing in Halewoods is P4, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing lost fourth to Chris Butt. Moose Knuckle is P2, 0.3 ahead of Jason Short. Jason Short in Pilgrim's Drop is P3, 0.2 behind Moose Knuckle. Chris Butt is P4, 0.7 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is P5, 0.9 behind Chris Butt. Moose Knuckle in Clark Curve is P2, 0.4 ahead of Jason Short. Jason Short in Halewoods is P3, 0.2 behind Moose Knuckle. Jason Short passed Moose Knuckle for second. Moose Knuckle in Cooper is third, 0.1 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Hawthorne Hill is second. Best lap is a 1:30.192. 0.511 off the fastest lap. Chris Butt on lap 3 is third, 0.8 behind Jason Short. The race dictator in Westfield is first, 1.2 ahead of Jason Short. Jason Short on lap 3 is P2, 0.3 ahead of Chris Butt. Chris Butt in Clearways is third. "15 minutes remaining in the session. Dave B Racing in Brabham Straight is P4, 0.2 behind Chris Butt. Chris Butt in Druids is fourth. Best lap is a 1:29.933. 0.252 off the fastest lap. Moose Knuckle in Surtees on lap 4 is fifth, 0.3 behind Chris Butt. Moose Knuckle passed Chris Butt for P4. Jason Short in Hawthorne's Bend is P2, 0.3 behind the race dictator. Moose Knuckle in Dingledale on lap 4 is fourth, 1.3 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing was 4.6 faster last lap. Jason Short is second, 0.4 behind the race dictator. Jason Short was 0.9 faster last lap. Moose Knuckle in Brabham is fourth. Best lap is a 1:29.921. 1.133 off the fastest lap. Jason Short in Graham Hill is second, 0.1 behind the race dictator. Moose Knuckle in Surtees Bend is P4, 0.7 behind Dave B Racing. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dicta Moose Knuckle in Dingledale is 4th, 0.1 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is 4th. The Race Dictator in Paddock Hill Bend is P2, 1.1 behind Jason Short. Moose Knuckle in Surtees is 3rd. The Race Dictator is P2, 1.5 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Clark is P1, 0.9 ahead of the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator is P2, 0.8 behind Jason Short. Ten minutes remaining in the session. Chris Butt in Graham Hill is 5th. The Race Dictator in Dingledale is P2, 1.1 behind Jason Short. Moose Knuckle in Clark is 3rd. The Race Dictator in Halewoods is P2. Best lap is a 128.733. 0.246 off the fastest lap. Chris Butt in Halewoods is P5, 0.9 behind Dave B Racing. The Race Dictator in Graham Hill is P2, 0.6 ahead of Moose Knuckle. Moose Knuckle from Canada in Cooper is P3, 0.4 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing in Hawthorne Hill is P4, 0.1 ahead of Chris Butt. Dave B Racing lost P4 to Chris Butt. The Race Dictator in Dingledale is 2nd. Moose Knuckle is third, 0.6 behind the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator in Brabham is P2, 0.6 behind Jason Short. Moose Knuckle in Druids is third, 0.6 behind the Race Dictator. Moose Knuckle was 5.4 faster last lap. Moose Knuckle is now second. Chris Butt is P4, 1.1 ahead of Dave B Racing. Chris Butt was 3.9 faster last lap. Dave B Racing in Pilgrim's Drop is 5th, 1.2 behind Chris Butt. Dave B Racing is now 4th. The Race Dictator is 5th battling Dave B Racing. The Race Dictator passed Dave B Racing for P4. Dave B Racing is 5th, 1.4 behind the Race Dictator. Dave B Racing was 14.8 faster last lap. The Race Dictator in Halewoods Hill is 4th, 1.5 ahead of Dave B Racing. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Moose Knuckle is P1, 4.6 ahead of Jason Short. Dave B Racing from New Zealand in Stirling's Bend is 5th, 2.3 behind the Race Dictator. Dave B Racing entering the pits is 5th. The Race Dictator in Clark is P4, 2.5 behind Chris Butt. Chris Butt was 7.4 faster last lap. Jason Short in Surtees Bend is 2nd, 3.9 ahead of Chris Butt. Jason Short was 1.5 faster last lap. Dave B Racing exiting pits. Chris Butt in Westfield Bend is 3rd, 1.9 ahead of the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator in Clark Curve is P4, 1.5 behind Chris Butt. Dave B Racing in Sterling's is 5th. The Race Dictator in Hawthorne Hill is 4th, 0.4 behind Chris Butt. The Race Dictator passed Chris Butt for 3rd. Moose Knuckle is P1. Dave B Racing in Westfield is P5. Jason Short in Hawthorne's Bend is P2. Best lap is a 128.487. The leader has just finished the race. Moose Knuckle finished 1st. Jason Short finished 2nd. The Race Dictator finished P3. Chris Butt finished P4. Dave B Racing is 5th. Dave B Racing finished P5. The race session is at Brands Hatch Circuit in Foxham, Great Britain. Dave B Racing from New Zealand is P1. Chris Butt from New Zealand is 2nd. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Dave B Racing is P1. Chris Butt in Halewoods Hill is P2. The Race Dictator from New Zealand is third. Moose Knuckle from Canada in Pilgrims is P4. Jason Short from New Zealand is P5. The Race Dictator is second. The Race Dictator lost fourth to Jason Short. Chris Butt in Clark Curve is second. Moose Knuckle in Halewoods is P3, 0.4 ahead of Jason Short. Jason Short in Graham Hill Bend is fourth, 0.4 behind Moose Knuckle. The Race Dictator in Pilgrim's Drop is P5, 0.6 behind Jason Short. Chris Butt in Westfield Bend is P2, 0.2 ahead of Moose Knuckle. Chris Butt lost P2 to Moose Knuckle. Jason Short in Sterling's is P2, 0.8 ahead of the Race Dictator. Jason Short passed Moose Knuckle for P1. Moose Knuckle is P2. Moose Knuckle passed Jason Short for first. The Race Dictator in Clark Curve is third, 0.7 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Brabham is second, 0.2 ahead of the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator in Halewoods Hill is P3, 0.3 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing from New Zealand in Graham Hill is P4, 0.4 ahead of Chris Butt. Chris Butt is fifth, 0.2 behind Dave B Racing. Chris Butt passed Dave B Racing for fourth. Dave B Racing in Westfield on lap 3 is fifth, 0.4 behind Chris Butt. Jason Short is P2, 0.3 ahead of the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator was 0.7 faster last lap. 15 minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator in Brabham is P3, 1.0 behind Jason Short. Chris Butt is P4, 0.5 ahead of Dave B Racing. Chris Butt lost 4th to Dave B Racing. The race dictator in Surtees is 2nd, 0.9 behind Moose Knuckle. Jason Short in Hawthorne Hill is P3, 0.5 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing in Dingledale is 4th, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Jason Short was 2.6 faster last lap. The race dictator in Clearways is P2, 0.6 behind Moose Knuckle. Jason Short in Brabham is 3rd. Best lap is a 1:31.627. 1.816 off the fastest lap. Dave B Racing in Druids is 4th, 1.4 behind Jason Short. The race dictator in Surtees is P2, 0.1 behind Moose Knuckle. The race dictator is now P1. Jason Short in Hawthorne's Bend on lap 5 is 2nd, 0.1 behind the race dictator. Jason Short passed the race dictator for 1st. The race dictator in Dingledale on lap 5 is P2, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Moose Knuckle in Clearways is P3, 0.6 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is P2, 0.4 ahead of Moose Knuckle. Moose Knuckle in Druids is P3. Best lap is a 1:30.604. 1.575 off the fastest lap. The race dictator in Surtees Bend is P2, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Jason Short was 1.1 faster last lap. Moose Knuckle in Hawthorne's Bend is 3rd, 0.3 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing in Dingledale is 4th. Best lap is a 1:29.775. 0.746 off the fastest lap. Moose Knuckle in Clearways is P3, 0.2 behind the race dictator. The race dictator in Paddock Hill is 2nd, 0.3 ahead of Moose Knuckle. Moose Knuckle is P3, 0.2 behind the race dictator. 10 minutes remaining in the session. Dave B racing in Hawthorne's Bend is P4, 1.7 behind Moose Knuckle. Dave B racing past Moose Knuckle for P3. Jason Short from New Zealand in Dingledale is first, 3.7 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator from New Zealand is second, 0.5 ahead of Dave B racing. Dave B racing in Sterling's is P3. The race dictator in Clearways is P2, 0.7 behind Jason Short. Moose Knuckle in Clark Curve on lap 7 is P4, 0.3 ahead of Chris Butt. Chris Butt in Brabham is P5. Best lap is a 1:30.120. 1.311 off the fastest lap. The race dictator in Druids is P2. Best lap is a 1:29.811. 1.002 off the fastest lap. Dave B racing in Surtees Bend is P3, 0.3 behind the race dictator. Dave B racing was 1.6 faster last lap. Moose Knuckle in Hawthorne's Bend on lap 8 is 4th, 0.2 behind Dave B racing. Dave B racing was 1.8 faster last lap. The race dictator in Dingledale is second. Moose Knuckle from Canada in Clearways is P3, 1.0 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is P2, 1.0 behind Jason Short. Moose Knuckle in Druids is P3, 1.2 behind the race dictator. The race dictator in Surtees is P2, 0.7 behind Jason Short. Dave B racing in Pilgrims is P5, 1.0 behind Moose Knuckle. The race dictator is P2, 0.7 behind Jason Short. Dave B racing in Sterling's Bend is 5th, 0.3 behind Moose Knuckle. Moose Knuckle was 8.5 faster last lap. The race dictator passed Jason Short for P1. Jason Short in Graham Hill is P2, 0.4 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is first, 0.2 ahead of Jason Short. Jason Short is P2, 0.1 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing is fourth, 1.1 behind Chris Butt. Jason Short in Halewoods is P2, 1.3 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing in Druids is fourth, 1.3 behind Chris Butt. Jason Short in Pilgrims is P2, 1.1 behind the race dictator. Chris Butt in Hawthorne Hill is fourth, 0.2 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short in Sterlings is P2, 0.8 behind the race dictator. Chris Butt is fourth, 0.3 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing was 3.0 faster last lap. The race dictator from New Zealand in Druids Bend is second, 0.2 behind Jason Short. Chris Butt in Druids is fourth, 0.5 behind Dave B Racing. The race dictator in Hawthorne Hill is P2. Best lap is a 129.320. 0.883 off the fastest lap. Chris Butt in Hawthorne's Bend is fourth, 0.8 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing was 1.4 faster last lap. The race dictator is P2. Chris Butt in Brabham is P4, 3.3 behind Dave B Racing. The race dictator is second, 1.0 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing in Hawthorne's Bend is P3. Best lap is a 129.436. 0.999 off the fastest lap. The leader has just finished the race. Jason Short finished first. The race dictator finished P2. Dave B Racing finished third. Chris Budd finished fourth. Moose Knuckle finished P5.